Beneath the cotton wealth and riverfront charm of antebellum Mobile, a quiet dread once gnawed at the city's heart. 1831 was a year swollen with sermons, fevered politics, and cotton surpluses, but also something else, something most residents refused to name. Daughters from respected families were vanishing, not in the backwoods or lawless quarters, but inside one of the city's most revered institutions. It was not a matter of abduction, not quite. Their families had placed them there willingly, and yet they never came home. The official answers were medical. The rumors were religious. The reality, once unearthed, was neither. The Mobile Female Institute opened in 1828 under a veil of social promise and progressive education. Advertised as a sanctuary for young women to receive rigorous instruction in literature, scripture, and deportment, it quickly became a favored destination for the daughters of southern gentry. Situated on the eastern edge of the city, flanked by pine groves and fenced in wrought iron, the campus boasted sprawling dormitories, marble classrooms, and a chapel that dominated its interior courtyard. Churchmen praised its discipline. Physicians consulted on its diet and regimen. Newspapers touted its graduates as refined blossoms of moral cultivation. Yet from its second year, letters from inside became erratic. Requests for visits were denied, and by 1831, the whispers had reached the port. Some girls were simply never seen again. In the spring of 1831, Mobile's main thoroughfare, Government Street, bustled with the carriages of cotton barons and parishioners alike, all bound for business, mass, or polite society. And just beyond the edge of that elegant order stood the wrought iron gate of the Mobile Female Institute, which at first glance resembled a modest plantation house reworked into an academic haven. Above the main entrance, carved into a white limestone arch, read the motto in faded Latin, Virtus per obedientiam, virtue through obedience. From its inception, the school carried the endorsement of Bishop Philemon Cray, a well-known Episcopal figure whose family had arrived in Alabama decades earlier, through land grants secured by military favor. Cray's presence on the school's founding board lent it immediate religious gravitas. But more than that, it offered the institution a moral shield against skepticism. For a city wary of anything new, particularly when it involved the education of women, Bishop Cray's name ensured that no scandal, no misstep, no fainting girl or secret punishment would rattle public trust. The bishop himself had no children, but referred to the Institute's students in sermons as lambs entrusted by the Lord to the pasture of discipline. The early enrollment rosters, now yellowed and incomplete, suggest that the first classes consisted of no more than 22 girls, primarily from families involved in the cotton trade, maritime law, or ecclesiastical administration. Some came from as far as Montgomery, others from nearby plantations along the Tombigbee River. These were not orphans or charity cases. They were girls with family names that carried weight. Jeffries, Crandall, Hainsworth. Tuition was steep, uniform costs steeper, and a moral contribution was expected from each parent, typically in the form of Bibles, preserved goods, or cotton bolts. Life inside the school was built upon ritual. The day began at 5 a.m. with a bell rung by the school's groundskeeper, a gaunt man named Owen Lackett, whose past was largely unknown. The girls were expected to be washed, dressed, and seated for recitation by 6. Breakfast, corn mush and chicory, was served at 7, followed by scripture, followed by silent labor in the gardens or laundries until 10. Only then did formal lessons begin. The subjects included English composition, sacred history, and Latin, though students noted that anatomy and natural sciences were conspicuously absent. When questioned by visiting parents, the headmistress, Eunice Hollard, would calmly explain that such topics inflamed the imagination and destabilized womanly humility. Miss Hollard was a widow of uncertain origin, reputed to have arrived from Savannah after her husband died in a yellow fever outbreak. Tall, with hair bound tight and lips permanently thinned, she rarely left the school grounds. Her quarters were above the main library, from which candlelight was sometimes seen well past midnight. Many of the girls feared her, and none dared speak her name without whispering. Staff referred to her only as matron. Discipline at the Institute followed what was referred to internally as the circuits of correction, Each girl had a ledger in which her infractions, lateness, insolence, failure to complete memory verses were recorded. Every Friday evening, the matron would read these ledgers aloud during the hour of judgment, held in the chapel. Minor offences resulted in prayer sessions or forfeited meals. Repeated offences resulted in what was euphemistically called withdrawal to stillness, a period of isolation in the infirmary wing overseen by a nurse named Miss Abatha Sneed. The girls who emerged from these confinements often returned quieter, pallid, and reluctant to speak. Some, however, did not return at all. When asked, the school offered varying explanations: consumption, family retrieval, sudden piety that required pilgrimage. In several cases, it was claimed the girls had married and relocated, though no names or destinations were ever provided. More curiously, no families ever came forward to dispute these stories. To understand how such an institution could thrive under these circumstances, one must consider the ethos of 1831 Mobile. The city was young, barely shaking off its frontier past, and desperate for legitimacy. It looked to Charleston and Savannah as models. The education of women, when discussed at all, was framed not as empowerment, but refinement. A quiet girl was a godly girl. A pale girl was a disciplined girl, and a silent institution was a successful one. Beneath this veneer of progress, a tighter net was being woven. Bishop Cray secured a grant from the diocese to expand the Institute's chapel. Mayor Benjamin Rainey wrote an open letter praising the moral tidings the school brought to Mobile's families. Even the local press, namely the Mobile Commercial Advertiser, printed glowing editorials about the modesty and wisdom of the school's graduates. None of them asked why only a fraction of the enrolled girls were ever seen at the term-end exhibitions. None questioned the absence of alumni letters or reunion events. And no one inquired why the postmaster began noting an unusually high volume of outgoing correspondence marked "Return to Sender." Those who did raise concerns did so in private, often in coded language. A letter preserved in the attic of the Mobile Genealogical Society, dated August 1831, reads in part, "I fear for Abigail. She writes no more. The school claims illness, but Mrs. L. saw her last week, pale as soap and dragging a broom at dusk. They say she took vows. We never heard of such a vow. I plan to ride there this Sunday, though they say visitors must now petition 3 days in advance." Even visiting the school had become a regulated ritual. Beginning in early 1831, families were instructed to submit written requests for visitation, which were then reviewed by a newly appointed Guardian Committee. This committee, curiously, did not include any faculty but rather 3 men whose titles were unclear. One was Dr. Jeremiah Wicks, a physician of questionable license who had once been implicated in a mismanaged surgical theatre at a Mobile workhouse. The others, Mr. Ellis Vaughan and Mr. Silas Pugh, were known mostly for their ties to the lumber export trade. When asked about their qualifications, Bishop Cray simply replied that they were men of devout character and practical mind. Those few families permitted to visit often described surreal, stilted encounters. Girls were led into parlors under supervision, spoke little and frequently cast furtive glances at the attending chaperone. One visitor, a plantation owner's wife from Pascagoula, recalled her daughter speaking in a voice that sounded borrowed, as though she had rehearsed every word under pressure. Another family found their daughter unfamiliar altogether. She neither recognized her brother nor responded to her own name. School officials insisted the girl had suffered a fever and was recovering her faculties through contemplation and hygiene. The Institute's growing mystique seemed only to feed its popularity among certain elites. For families whose daughters had grown unruly or embarrassing, those with fits, melancholia, or simply too many opinions, the school offered a final chance at control. One merchant's diary from April 1831 recorded, "Lucy's fits. I cannot have her here with clients present. We shall send her to the Institute. They know what to do with nerves there." But not all were blind. In the final week of April, a series of anonymous broadsides began appearing near the docks and taverns of Mobile. Each bore the same handwritten message in ink and charcoal. "They take your daughters and call it God's work, but not even God can explain what happens past the gate." The broadsides were crude and unsigned, but they struck a nerve. Within a week, dockworkers, barbers, and even servants at the Episcopal rectory began whispering about the silent school. They said a girl had died in the infirmary and been buried before dawn. They said nurses there used vinegar and ash to quiet screaming. One version claimed a girl had chewed through the hem of her own uniform, trying to keep from crying out during the corrections. Another, more vivid, described a room at the back of the chapel where they made the girls kneel until their legs gave out, calling it the repentance floor. Officially, the Mobile Female Institute denied all. The school's spokespeople, when they appeared, were uniformly composed. Bishop Cray himself issued a letter to the Mobile Commercial Advertiser on May 2, 1831. In it, he declared, "The Institute remains a beacon of virtue, falsely maligned by the ignorant and the envious. Let no mother or father give credence to dockside gossip." That same week, 3 more families attempted to visit their daughters and were turned away due to unexpected spiritual exercises occurring on the grounds. But one visitor did manage to gain entry without prior approval. Her name was Rebecca Marsden, and she arrived unannounced from Biloxi in the middle of a thunderstorm, claiming her niece had fallen ill. She was told to wait. An hour passed, then another. Finally, a young assistant named Clara, no more than 12 and visibly nervous, escorted her to a small reception chamber. There Rebecca found her niece, Margaret, sitting stiffly in a chair, hands folded too tightly, eyes darting to the ceiling whenever Rebecca spoke. The conversation, according to Rebecca's later affidavit, was unreal, like talking through glass. Margaret refused to answer questions directly. She kept referring to the matron as our shield. When Rebecca leaned in to ask what had happened, Margaret murmured, "We must empty ourselves to be clean. Don't you want me clean?" Before Rebecca could press further, Miss Hollard entered the room, her face calm, her hands gloved despite the summer heat. She offered Rebecca a cordial and a statement signed by Margaret, indicating she was committed joyfully to God's formation. Rebecca returned to Biloxi the next morning and never saw her niece again. The Institute, meanwhile, doubled down. By June 1831, they had ceased all correspondence with families who asked too many questions. At the same time, they expanded their enrollment window, soliciting new applicants from farther afield. Letters were sent to parishes in Georgia, Mississippi, even parts of Tennessee. The message was consistent, a place of peace, purity, and discipline, where wayward daughters could become instruments of grace. But cracks began to form where they were least expected. Within the Institute's own staff, a young instructor named Lydia Morton, brought in to teach handwriting and scriptural copying, began noticing irregularities in attendance. Lydia kept meticulous records, pages of neat inked lines tracking when each girl attended class, what passages they copied, and which phrases they struggled with. In late June, she discovered that 3 girls, Anne Crandall, Eliza Hainsworth, and Mercy Tate, had not appeared in her sessions for over 2 weeks. When she asked Miss Hollard, she was told that Anne had been taken into contemplative retreat, Eliza had returned to her people in sanctity, and Mercy was undergoing treatment for congestion of the brain. Lydia, uneasy but unsure of protocol, confided her concerns to Owen Lackett, the groundskeeper. Lackett, a silent man with a cleft upper lip and a limp, listened without speaking. Later that week, he left a folded scrap of paper beneath Lydia's teaching ledger. It contained only 4 words: "Behind chapel after sundown." When she arrived, the grounds were silent. Pine needles muffled her steps. The chapel's rear door, normally locked, was ajar. Inside, the air was heavy with chalk and wax. What Lydia found was not dramatic. No bodies, no cries, just a ledger on a narrow table beneath a covered window. It was labeled Transitions. She opened it. The names were listed in pairs of 2. On the left, the birth names of the students. On the right, new names: Servant Agnes, Vessel Clara, Sister Silence. Many of them matched girls she had taught. Anne Crandall had become Sister Oath. Eliza Hainsworth now Obedience. Mercy Tate Dust. Dates were written beside each name. Some had notations: confirmed, purged, transferred. A few had a simple X. She counted 13 such names. Lydia took the ledger to the dormitories, hoping to confirm at least one of the transformations. She called out to Sister Silence, and the girl she knew as Ruth Melton turned to face her. Her eyes were clear but absent, her posture ramrod straight. She did not speak. When Lydia addressed her as Ruth, the girl flinched, then whispered, "She is gone now. We do not wake what has been cleaned." The following morning, Lydia confronted Miss Hollard. The matron did not deny the ledger. Instead, she nodded slowly and said, "The daughters become what the world cannot understand. We do not fear the confusion of the uninitiated. We cleanse, and they serve." Lydia was dismissed the same day under pretense of disruptive sentimentality. Her departure was not documented in Institute records. By midsummer, enrollment had grown to its highest in the Institute's brief history. 24 new girls arrived in July alone. 2 of them would later be confirmed missing. One, Sarah Devane, wrote a final letter to her brother in Hattiesburg, claiming, "Something in the water here makes the nights feel longer." When her brother rode to Mobile to find her, he was told she had returned home. She hadn't. Her brother petitioned the city council. The petition was denied on jurisdictional grounds. Perhaps the most unsettling account came from a carpenter hired to repair the chapel ceiling after a leak during an August storm. The man, known locally as Samson Gwynn, said that while in the crawl space above the nave, he found not just rotten mildew but pages, handwritten pages, torn from student prayer books. They were scorched at the edges, blackened as if by candle. The writing on them was erratic, looping, obsessive, repeated over and over in different hands. "I am not myself. They unmake us. Silence is virtue." Samson turned the pages into the city guard. Nothing came of it. By September, the gates of the Mobile Female Institute were being locked at all hours. Food deliveries were taken at the edge of the property by armed staff. Girls were no longer seen in the windows. The bell stopped ringing. And still the Institute issued glowing reports. In one published bulletin, "Our girls grow in modesty and strength. Their obedience is our gift to God." The city, for the most part, allowed it to, so long as no bodies appeared, no crimes could be claimed. So long as no family declared their daughter missing, no investigation could begin. And so long as the clergy remained aligned, no voice of consequence would speak against the place. We'll examine the warnings, letters, and hidden testimonies that surfaced as more daughters vanished, and the quiet terror that grew as no one was willing or able to intervene. The earliest known formal complaint regarding the Mobile Female Institute surfaced in October of 1831, submitted by a merchant's widow named Frances Everly. Her daughter, Cornelia, had been enrolled for just under 8 months. In her petition to the Episcopal Diocese, Mrs. Everly described a troubling change in Cornelia's demeanor during a rare mid-year visit. "She no longer reached for my hand. Her speech was mechanical, as though recited. When I asked if she had made friends, she replied only, 'We are all made even now.'" The letter went unanswered. 3 weeks later, Mrs. Everly attempted a second visit and was denied entry. She returned with a local pastor, who was told by a staff member at the gate that Cornelia had ascended to another phase of obedience. Mrs. Everly never saw her daughter again. The language used by the school had begun to shift. Reports to families were saturated with theological euphemism, cleansing, ascent, retreat to sacred hush. In some cases, daughters were said to have evaporated from the old self. One letter referred to a girl's transformation as a turning from flesh into virtue, which her family found so unsettling they requested immediate withdrawal. They were told she was no longer under their authority. But more than euphemisms, there were artifacts. Things slipped into envelopes, things not meant to be sent. A family in Daphne, the Bellways, received what appeared to be a monthly update from their daughter Marilla. The envelope bore the Institute's official wax seal. Inside were 3 pages, 2 of them formal and polite, filled with religious reflections. The third, folded and hidden behind the others, was smaller, more frantic. Its lines read, "The walls whisper, the food makes us slow, they burn our names, do not let them keep me." It was unsigned. The Bellways took the letter to their parish priest, who discouraged them from creating a stir. He assured them the girl was under the care of faithful guides. Marilla was never heard from again. Such warnings, oblique, fragmented, desperate, surfaced in at least 7 other cases throughout the fall. Always in handwriting the families barely recognized, always sent from within envelopes bearing the Institute's seal. One letter found its way to a riverboat captain in Montgomery whose niece had enrolled that summer. It contained only a single sentence written in charcoal on linen: "They unname us." Yet none of these families brought formal charges. None contacted the city constable. There were reasons. In 1831, the voice of a daughter was still a fragile thing, easily silenced by theology, by class, by the accusation of hysteria. The families were not laborers or freedmen. They were gentry, merchants, deacons. Their reputations were linked to the Institute's image. To accuse the school was to risk social rupture. Besides, most had been told, repeatedly, that the disappearances were personal matters, that their daughters had been retrieved by the Spirit, or committed to higher instruction. And when pressed, Bishop Cray himself would summon Scripture: "Blessed is she who submits to refinement, for she shall be made spotless." Beneath this theological smokescreen, the school's internal operations grew more secluded. Correspondence was filtered. Staff turnover increased. 3 instructors left without notice between October and December. The only record of one, Mrs. Helena Vaught, a music teacher, was a discarded letter found in her rental home after she vanished. It read in slanted, uneven hand, "I tried not to hear it, but it hums beneath the chapel stones. The girls do not sleep. Their names are fed into the fire." That letter never reached the authorities. It was discovered nearly a year later during an unrelated property seizure. Outside the Institute's walls, suspicions began to collect in strange places. Dock workers overhearing supply requests for unneeded chemicals. A mason contracted to reseal foundation stones in early November, noted peculiar discoloration in the stone beneath the east dormitory, traces of iron, ash, and what he described as a coppery stench like spoiled game. He reported it to the supplier. No action was taken. Even the postmaster's apprentice, a lanky teenager named Ambrose Thicket, began keeping his own records. In a hidden compartment beneath his desk, he recorded the increasing frequency of returned mail marked "Recipient Unknown" from the Institute. His ledger lists 17 such letters between August and November, far above any comparable school. In the margins, Ambrose scribbled questions. Why all unknown now? Who cancels a daughter's name? These questions never left his journal. Ambrose died of fever the following spring. His records found only decades later in a family attic. The turning point came in December, when a girl named Louisa Rambley escaped. Her story would only surface in fragments, stitched together by scattered interviews, court transcripts, and oral histories. But what is known is this: Louisa was 17, from a planter family west of the city. Enrolled since spring, she had become increasingly despondent according to staff notes, labeled as slow to blend, non-compliant, and finally, resistant to alignment. In early December, Louisa feigned illness during morning exercises. Allowed to rest in the infirmary, she reportedly overpowered the nurse, Miss Sneed, who suffered severe injury to her wrist, and fled into the surrounding woods under cover of fog. She was discovered 3 days later by a trapper named Hob Atkins, delirious and barefoot, her hands wrapped in torn linen. She was taken to a mission outpost on the outskirts of town, where she was given shelter by a nun who would later testify under seal. Louisa refused to speak at first. Then, over a period of days, she whispered fragments. The chapel floor had trapdoors. Some girls were never called by their names again. She claimed to have seen a furnace where they put our memories. The nun recorded her testimony as best she could. A week later, the girl was taken by her family and never spoke publicly again. Yet the Institute was prepared. By the time city officials requested an inquiry, the infirmary had been remodeled, the nurse reassigned, and Louisa's official file marked "Emancipated by Divine Authority." Bishop Cray denounced the entire incident as theatrics of a disturbed child. Still, the city's tone began to change. A council meeting in late December included, for the first time, mention of concerns related to the Female Institute. Though no vote was held, the matter was formally entered into record. It was the first public documentation acknowledging that not all was as it seemed behind those iron gates. But by then the silence had already metastasized. In the final weeks of 1831, while most of Mobile prepared for the holy days, a quiet panic had begun to spread among those who had, until then, dismissed the rumors about the Institute. Not in the drawing rooms or at the port, not openly, but in hushed conversations between house servants among the nuns at St. Mary's Mission, and in coded letters between rural pastors whose nieces or cousins had been sent to the school and never returned. One such letter, written by Father Aloysius Knorr of Bayeux-la-Batre to his colleague in Montgomery, was later found among diocesan papers misfiled under property deeds. In it he wrote, "I have heard what you heard. The girl was not right when they brought her back. She would not sit. She wept in the absence of sound. She spoke in rhythms, as if reciting something etched into her. They told me she had suffered a spell, but I do not believe in spells." By January, at least 5 girls had been quietly withdrawn by their families under the pretense of illness. None of those girls would ever speak publicly. One was institutionalized within a month. Another died of consumption in a clinic outside Hattiesburg. The others simply vanished from records, their names appearing only in private family trees and grave ledgers, always without detail. Meanwhile, the Institute prepared for its winter term. New students arrived under fog-choked skies, escorted by parents who had either not heard or refused to believe what had been circulating. The school responded to increasing suspicion with renewed formality. Redoubled religious references, a full-page advertisement in the Mobile Commercial Advertiser touting its divine regimen, and a letter from Bishop Cray offering a scriptural defense of holy silence as the soil of virtue. But for all its defenses, a current had begun to pull beneath the surface. 2 teachers, Mr. Eldon Frey, a language tutor, and Miss Beatrice Dorr, a mathematics assistant, left without explanation within a week of each other. Frey's room was found empty, his belongings gone. Dorr's departure was stranger. Her possessions were left untouched, her resignation letter unsigned, and her ledger of class notes half burned in the fireplace. In the margins of her final entry was scrawled, "I dream them walking without sound. They cannot blink. They do not know they are not alone." A carpenter brought in to reinforce the chapel floor, this time under Bishop Cray's personal request, made a quiet report to the city clerk. He had found wooden boards replaced with slate in a pattern inconsistent with any building standard. Beneath the altar, he said, was an unmarked depression in the stone, smooth as bone. The report was filed and never followed up. Some tried to act. One family, the Houghtons of Clark County, sent their eldest son, an aspiring physician, to pose as an academic evaluator. He entered the institute under the name of a former associate of Bishop Cray, carrying forged documents and references. What he witnessed in his 3 days there would never be fully documented. He returned to Clark Pale, withdrawn, and resigned from his medical apprenticeship. In his private notebook, discovered posthumously, he wrote, "The girls do not look at you. They look beyond you. When spoken to, they do not respond unless touched. Their responses are rehearsed. They recite entire passages backward." I asked one if she knew her name. She smiled and said, "We are all named Vessel now." The faculty do not teach, they observe. His notes continued, more erratic. "Hollard is not a teacher. She is a gate. There is a room beneath the bell tower. It is always warm, too warm. The air tastes like metal. I heard them singing when no one moved their lips." The Houghton family attempted to publish a formal complaint. Their letter to the city council was intercepted. Bishop Cray published a rebuttal in the Episcopal Register, accusing them of slander and deceitful intrusion under false witness. The council chose not to pursue the matter. Rescue from outside was minimal. Mobile in 1831 was still a place of compartmentalized knowledge. What happened at the docks did not reach the drawing rooms. What occurred in sanctified institutions remained sacred, and so the silence held. But internally, the institute began to show fractures. Girls who had once been described as passively obedient began exhibiting episodes of detachment. Some would wander the corridors at night. One was found in the garden before dawn, digging with her bare hands, whispering about a root that grows backwards. Another, caught humming during morning scripture, was confined for 3 days. Upon release, she would not speak at all. She would only write, and only one sentence: "The chapel floor remembers." Miss Hollard, increasingly reclusive, began attending chapel sessions from behind a screen. Some staff claimed she no longer ate with the faculty. Others whispered that she had taken to sleeping in the chapel itself, her room dark and untouched, for weeks. One stormy evening, a bolt of lightning struck the chapel spire, cracking the bell housing. The resulting fire was contained before it spread to the dormitories, but it revealed something unintended. Behind the altar wall, hidden beneath layers of plaster and paint, was a sealed iron. Hatch maintenance workers, under orders from Dr. Wicks, were told to reseal it immediately. One of them, a young freedman named James Kettles, later told his sister that the hatch was scratched from the inside. Within days, James was dismissed from his position. The final documented disappearance of 1831 occurred on December 28th. The girl's name was Eleanora Chase. She was 15, from Decatur. Her final letter to her parents contained the following: "I saw the mirror turn black. The matron said I was ready. If I do not write again, remember the name you gave me. It is the only thing left of me." No official cause for her absence was given. The institute claimed she had transferred. No school in Alabama, Georgia, or Mississippi ever received her. As the year turned to 1832, Mobile's air was heavy with unsaid things. The institute's windows glowed late into the night. Its bell no longer rang, and those who passed by said they sometimes heard the girls humming in unison, low, without harmony, without pause. We'll open the sealed walls and trace the brief, harrowing investigation that threatened to reveal the full truth, only to be buried again deeper than before. The first formal investigation into the Mobile Female Institute was not launched by the city, nor by any church authority, but by a 32-year-old shipping clerk named Edgar Linton. Linton was not from one of Mobile's respected families. Born in Toulminville to a washerwoman and a crippled dock laborer, he had risen only slightly above his origins through precision and quietness. His niece, Rutha, was the third of 5 sisters and had been enrolled at the Institute in June of 1831. By November, her letters stopped arriving. Her mother was told that Rutha had chosen contemplative withdrawal. No further explanation was provided. Edgar, pragmatic and deliberate, visited the school in person. He was turned away at the gate. He returned with a pastor. He was turned away again. In late December, he filed a formal grievance with the Office of Municipal Records, citing suspicion of concealment and educational malpractice. It was ignored, so he did what others would not. He began compiling names. Starting with baptismal rosters and church registries, he compared enrollment announcements to local marriage logs, death notices, and public census reports. Within weeks, he had a list of 29 girls who had entered the Mobile Female Institute since 1829 and who had, by all available records, simply vanished. Some were marked as removed. Others had notations like transferred, retreated, or, more ominously, withdrawn to sanctity. Not a single one had reappeared in civic records. No marriages, no graves, no relocation documents. He shared his findings with a friend at the Mobile Register, who passed them to a clerk at the county courthouse. This time, a whisper made it into official minutes. Inquiry requested into conditions and student welfare at the female educational facility on Chapel Road. The date was January 18, 1832. Within a week, an inspection was scheduled. Edgar accompanied the 2 city clerks assigned to the inspection. They arrived on a Thursday morning, escorted by Constable Jabez Rowley, a man known for his methodical approach and aversion to drama. The 3 men presented themselves at the gate and were received, somewhat surprisingly, by Miss Hollard herself. She appeared calm, if thinner than reports had suggested. Her lips were cracked, her gloves damp with what appeared to be oil. She offered tea. They declined. The tour began with the dormitories. Rows of narrow cots, each made perfectly. No personal effects, no portraits, no names. Hollard explained that uniformity promoted divine equality. When asked how students were differentiated, she replied, "Obedience creates identity. Names are burdens." They were then shown the classrooms, immaculate, quiet, arranged in symmetrical patterns. Not a single chalkboard bore any writing. "We memorize," Hollard said. "We do not scribble what should live in the spirit." In the kitchens, the staff stood motionless, their faces blank, hands behind backs. Edgar noticed that the bread being baked bore impressions, faint symbols not unlike scriptural runes. He asked. Hollard replied that spiritual digestion is more complete when the body consumes order. The inspection nearly ended without incident. But as they passed the chapel, Edgar paused. The door was slightly ajar. He stepped in. Sunlight filtered through high-stained glass, illuminating the main aisle. The altar was pristine, but behind it, partially concealed by a draped cloth, was the iron hatch discovered during the lightning fire the previous month. Edgar approached it. Hollard's voice sharpened. "That is a sanctified place. No man may enter." Constable Rowley, by protocol, insisted. Hollard refused. An argument ensued. Edgar, without waiting, pulled back the cloth. The hatch had been resealed with wax and iron rivets, but above it, carved into the stone in a language not immediately recognizable, was a phrase repeated 3 times. "To become less is to become whole." Rowley ordered the hatch opened. Hollard stepped back. Her eyes, according to Edgar's later statement, shone like glass submerged in ink. A staff member produced a rusted key. The hatch groaned. A rush of hot air emerged, dry, metallic, carrying a faint odor of lime and decay. Beneath was a narrow staircase descending into darkness. What the inspection team found in that chamber would never be published in the mobile register. Only Edgar's private notes, discovered years later in a locked case, described what they saw. The chamber was roughly circular, 30 feet below the chapel. Its walls were lined with narrow cubbies, each no larger than a coffin, and inside each one remnants. Fragments of clothing, chalk scrawls, finger marks, bone fragments, scorched books. In the center of the chamber was a single stone basin, filled with what appeared to be ash mixed with salt. On the wall above it, more writing, "From flesh, name is born, from name, rebellion. Remove name, remove flesh." There were no bodies, only residues. Edgar, in his notes, described the silence of that room as alive. Constable Rowley vomited. The clerk said nothing. They surfaced 2 hours later. Miss Hollard was gone. She was never seen again. What followed in the next 48 hours was a cascade of institutional maneuvering. Bishop Cray denied all knowledge. The institute was placed under re-evaluation. Staff were dismissed. Girls were sent home or relocated to other schools, most of them dazed and unwilling to speak. The chapel was shuttered, the hatch sealed with concrete. City records filed the entire event as an internal doctrinal misalignment. No charges were filed. Edgar left Mobile within the year. His niece was never found, but in his final journal entry he wrote, "It was not witchcraft. It was not madness. It was a method." They had learned to erase identity with discipline, with starvation, with repetition, and when the name was gone, the girl followed. The inspection team's descent into the stone chamber beneath the chapel was never mentioned in the city's official report. Instead, the publicly available summary of the January 1832 inspection, published in the County Registrar, stated only, "The Mobile Female Institute was found to be operating in a condition consistent with the educational and moral expectations of our religious community. Minor irregularities were noted in architectural maintenance. No reference was made to the chamber, to the ash-filled basin, or to the evidence of confinement beneath the altar." The 2 clerks who had accompanied Edgar Linton and Constable Rowley both left their positions within weeks of the visit. 1. Jonas Fleet moved north to Philadelphia. The other, Russell Barnum, was discovered drowned in the Mobile River under circumstances that police called inconclusive. His widow claimed he had been unable to sleep since the inspection and had taken to drawing strange symbols on the walls of their home in soap and soot. Constable Rowley remained in Mobile, but refused to speak about the incident. His behavior changed dramatically. Known previously for his rigid and conservative views, he began attending Mass daily, alone and often unshaven. He refused to patrol near the old institute grounds. Once, when asked if the school had been hiding something demonic, he replied only, "It was worse, it was deliberate." What followed was a coordinated effort to dissolve memory. Within a fortnight of the inspection, Bishop Cray petitioned the diocese for immediate closure of the institute, citing shifts in theological emphasis. The school's physical property was transferred to a newly formed board, the Alabama Ecclesiastical Health Council, which promptly sold it to a private developer. None of the previous faculty were retained. Most left the city entirely. Hollard was never found. Edgar Linton's notes indicate he made repeated attempts to contact the families of the missing girls. Few responded. One father reportedly burned the letter in front of his parish priest, declaring, "We will not entertain this sickness in the name of memory." Another sent a reply stating only, "We were told to let it go." The new owners of the property demolished the chapel within 3 months. The stone basin was removed and destroyed. The basement chamber, though filled with lime and sealed in concrete, was rumored to have resisted multiple demolition attempts. At least 2 laborers walked off the job mid-shift, claiming nausea and vertigo whenever they worked beneath the eastern wall. The rest of the building was converted into a private convalescent home for widows and elderly clergy, renamed Grace Repose. By 1833, it was operational, though attendance was sparse. Staff reported frequent complaints from residents about muffled recitations at night, always heard from the floor beneath their beds. The home operated until 1846, when a fire consumed the east wing and the entire property was quietly condemned. In the broader city, the memory of the institute began to evaporate. The street was renamed. Directories removed the listing. Parishes stopped mentioning the school in their bulletins. Even families who had lost daughters seemed to erase them from memory. Portraits disappeared. Bibles with inscriptions were torn out. Gravestones, where placed, listed only first names or none at all. Yet fragments endured. A traveling merchant in 1834 claimed to have purchased a small prayer book from a trader near Tuscaloosa, bound in worn cloth and bearing the initials MFI. Inside were annotations in at least 6 distinct hands, all naming the same phrase, "To cleanse the flesh, burn the name." The merchant sold the book to a collector in New Orleans. It was never seen again. In 1837, a girl named Nora Tespin, institutionalized in a mobile infirmary for religious fugue, reportedly recited the entire daily routine of the institute in perfect order, though she had never attended. Her records list her diagnosis as delirium via second-hand theology. She died a year later from injuries sustained after tearing her own name from every document in her hospital file. In total, Edgar Linton identified 31 girls, whose disappearances he believed were directly tied to the Institute's methods. He died in 1842, penniless, his case against the Episcopal Diocese still unresolved. His journals, preserved by a cousin, would not be rediscovered until the 1890s. By then, the land where the Institute once stood had become a public green and later a trolley junction. No plaque was ever placed, no names ever honored, but stories persisted, whispered by nurses, passed down by servants, hinted at by retired clergy who kept too many locks on their office drawers. Stories of a school where the daughters of Alabama's elite were sent not to be educated, but to be emptied. We'll explore the legacy of this silence, the few voices that tried to preserve the truth, and the ways the memory of the Mobile Female Institute was quietly erased from every textbook, registry, and sermon until nothing remained but rumor. And the missing. By 1845, Mobile had reshaped itself. The cotton boom, bolstered by new shipping lanes and mercantile expansion, had made the city one of the wealthiest in the South. New buildings rose over old foundations, districts were renamed, parishes consolidated, and the land where the Mobile Female Institute had once stood, 3 acres bordered by now defunct Chapel Road, had become an unmarked transit point for municipal trolleys and commercial wagons. The past as intended had been paved over. But erasure leaves sediment, The first attempt to formally document what occurred within the institute came not from the church or city council, but from a northern abolitionist named Miriam Hale. In 1851, Hale passed through Mobile under the guise of chronicling Southern educational practices for a Boston-based journal. What she compiled instead were fragments, unpublished testimonies, street-level rumors, and parish records quietly offered by black clergy and housemaids whose mothers or grandmothers had served as laundresses at the school. Hale's manuscript, titled Virtue's Price, was completed in 1853 but never published. Multiple northern editors declined it, citing a lack of verifiable sources and morbid conjecture. Her work was shelved, and Miriam Hale returned to Massachusetts. She died a decade later unknown. Still, her notes survived. They described rooms with no mirrors, prayer circles that involved silence rather than speech, chore schedules where the girls rotated not only tasks but names. Hale found evidence that some girls were assigned new identities each month, with names drawn from scripture or fabricated entirely. The names became roles and eventually fixed states: Sister Hush, Vessel 1, Light's Absence. In one housemaid's account, a girl who refused to adopt her new name was denied meals for 3 days and then reassigned to the infirmary. She never returned to the dormitory. The infirmary, according to several testimonies, had no doctor, only Miss Sneed and a series of assistants who were quiet with hands like bark. Hale documented one particular entry from a visiting bishop's diary. "The girls are ghosts before their time. I prayed for their return, but found no door." During her time in Mobile, Hale met with Edgar Linton's cousin, David. Now a port clerk, he possessed the original journals Edgar had compiled. Hale transcribed them by hand, noting that they contained not only names, but detailed observations on chapel rituals and construction anomalies. One entry included a drawing of the hatch under the altar, labeled Threshold of Reduction. Another speculated on the purpose of the chalkless classrooms. If they write nothing, nothing remains to contradict. Hale concluded that the Institute had developed a system of psychological obliteration through ritualized obedience and identity fragmentation. Her theory, radical for the time, argued that the institution had pioneered what she called preclinical conversion therapy, where girls deemed unruly, melancholic, or intellectually defiant were systematically reduced into passivity through isolation, renaming, sleep manipulation, and selective starvation. The goal, she wrote, was not education, but erasure. Her manuscript was eventually stored in a library basement at a women's college in Vermont. It remained there, uncatalogued, for over a century. Within Mobile, the church tightened its grip on memory. The Episcopal Diocese, under Bishop Cray's successor, issued an internal directive in 1857 ordering all references to the Mobile Female Institute to be removed from diocesan archives. Staff records were destroyed. Building plans were sealed. Sermons that had once praised the school were quietly revised or replaced. Any mention of the name rituals was attributed to hysteria, spiritual metaphor, or regional folklore. But the memory endured among the city's black residents. Through oral tradition, stories of the school where girls forgot themselves were passed down. Grandmothers told of hearing voices at night near the old trolley line. Older men spoke of dreams where daughters called from underground chambers. One midwife, interviewed during a federal folklore project in the 1930s, recalled her mother working laundry at the institute. She said, "They didn't feed the girls right, didn't let them sleep much, always telling them they were too loud. They made them walk in lines and sing about silence." In 1872, a brief but failed movement attempted to resurrect the school grounds as a seminary. A northern investor purchased the land, unaware of its history. Construction halted when workers found old stonework beneath the soil. Several quit after a foundation wall collapsed into what was described as an airless cavity. Local legend holds that one worker saw carvings too shallow to read but too deliberate to be accidental. The investor pulled out. The lot remained unused for nearly 30 more years. In 1901, a trolley expansion forced excavation of part of the old site. Laborers uncovered charred remains of brickwork, rusted locks, and fragments of iron latticing. No official report was made, but one foreman reportedly told his crew, "Seal it, don't ask." A week later, concrete was poured. No commemorative marker was placed. By the 1920s, only the oldest residents remembered the institute. Stories remained only in the corners, among nuns who had inherited undocumented confessions, and among the dwindling descendants of staff who left Mobile before the closure. The daughters who had been sent there became myths. No one knew how many had vanished. No one could prove what had been done. Their names were absent from church rolls, civic records, gravestones. But not all memory dies quietly. The rediscovery began not with a historian or journalist, but with a utilities supervisor named Clark Henley. In 1963, during a routine inspection of subterranean cable routes near Dauphin Street, Henley stumbled upon a sealed cavity beneath an abandoned lot previously used as a tram staging area. The cavity wasn't on any city plan. According to the site maps, there was nothing beneath that soil but clay. What Henley found instead was a short bricked corridor terminating in a rusted iron-bound door. City policy required reporting such anomalies, but Henley took photographs first. The door bore no signage, but a symbol was scratched faintly across its surface, a circle split by a downward-pointing cross. The site was resealed 2 days later, under orders from the Department of Public Works. Officially, the chamber was labeled non-structural void, filled with concrete. But Henley kept the photos. Decades later, his grandson would donate them to a historical society project cataloguing lost architecture of pre-Civil War Mobile. The symbol on the door caught the attention of Professor Lena Hartzell, a religious historian conducting research on antebellum Southern convent practices. What followed was a 10-year investigation that would quietly reawaken the suppressed truth of the Mobile Female Institute. Hartzell's research began with the symbol. Through comparisons with disused ecclesiastical codes, she traced its presence to a short-lived monastic shorthand for erasure of self, adopted briefly in the 1820s by a conservative offshoot of Episcopal reformers. The movement, known internally as the Order of Hush, emphasized identity dissolution as a path to virtue. Public records reference the order only 3 times, all in relation to educational experiments involving adolescent girls in Alabama and Georgia. That was the link. The name Mobile Female Institute appeared in a single footnote from an 1832 missionary letter archived at a seminary in Augusta. The letter referenced disciplinary ambitions of the MFI model, citing it as an early exemplar of enforced sanctified stillness. The rest of the document was redacted. Hartzell filed formal archival access requests across multiple southern dioceses. Most were denied. Others yielded fragments, lists of retired clergy, vague allusions to decommissioned programs, and one haunting phrase in a sealed box of church minutes. Hollard's method, though fruitful, proved unsustainable in the wake of disruption. Determined, Hartzell tracked down Miriam Hale's original manuscript at a women's college in Vermont. The box was marked Personal Effects, uncatalogued. Inside were 300 pages of hand-copied notes, newspaper clippings, witness statements, and a hand-drawn map of the Institute grounds, long since lost to city development. Among the notes was a passage from Hale's transcription of Edgar Linton's journal. They wanted the girls to stop answering to their names. Once they stopped responding, they were made to forget. That forgetting, they said, was the beginning of holiness. Hartzell published a partial history in an academic journal in 1977. Its impact was minimal. Most dismissed her findings as speculative. A few theologians accused her of attacking episcopal legacy. Her grant was not renewed, but she continued her work privately. In the 1980s, a series of discoveries added weight to her claims. A renovation of a downtown parish hall revealed a sealed cupboard behind the altar. Inside were hymnals stamped with MFI, a baptismal ledger listing 26 unnamed girls, and a damaged chalkboard bearing the word obedience written 57 times in childlike script. The items were quietly donated to the Mobile Historical Museum, which displayed them without context under the title Religious School Artifacts, circa 1830s. Then, in 1994, came the confirmation. During renovations to the City Records building, a worker uncovered a misfiled box marked Infirmary Correspondence. Inside were medical notes signed by Dr. Jeremiah Wicks and Abitha Sneed, detailing procedures used on institute residents. One entry read, "Subject 004 no longer answers to personal name, resists daily rites. Apply saline deprivation and reflectivity immersion." Another noted, "Subject 019 confirmed transition." She recites stillness pledge without hesitation. Reassignment to silent suite successful. These documents left little doubt. The procedures described were not medical. They were ritualized psychological conditioning designed to erase identity through repetition, isolation, and what the documents called reflective purification. The goal was total obedience, defined not by behavior, but by the eradication of the self. Public interest was minimal. A local news feature aired in 1995 under the title "Forgotten School, Forgotten Girls." It ran once. Viewers described it as bleak, unsettling, and too strange to follow. The city issued no formal statement. Hartzell died in 1999. Her personal archives, donated to the University of South Alabama, contain the last known copy of the original names list compiled by Edgar Linton. 31 girls. Ages 11 to 17. No graves, no marriages, no return. Today there is no plaque on the site where the mobile female institute once stood. The lot is used for parking. Each morning, cars roll over the concrete that seals the chamber where girls once forgot their own names. Pedestrians pass. Conversations echo. But no one speaks of the place. And yet, the silence remains. If this story impacted you, if you stayed until the end, it's because you feel these hidden truths also need to be exposed. So leave in the comments the city you're watching from. This way, we can see how far these stories are reaching. And subscribe to the channel. There are many other cases the world tried to forget, but we insist on remembering.